Hello and welcome to my presentation. My name is Amy Plant. I'm an occupational therapist and currently doing a PhD at Cardiff University. The title of my PhD is Challenging the School to Prison Pipeline for Children with Neurodevelopmental Disorders in Pupil Referral Units. The project is funded by CES2 East, Cardiff University, the Welsh Government's European Social Fund and Do It Solutions. Do It Solutions is a Cardiff-based company who have developed a modular-based online tool called the Do It Profiler, which is a tailored online screening tool that helps deliver person-centered support for all neurodiverse individuals. It has been tailored for use within the education sector, with employers and within prisons. The overarching aim of my project, in partnership with Do It Solutions Limited, is to establish how Pupil Referral Unit, PRUs, and health and social care can work more effectively to address the holistic needs of children with neurodevelopmental disorders as a potential means of preventing the long-term negative consequences that have been consistently identified within the literature. So now I'm going to give you some background information in regards to my study. Children excluded from mainstream school are 7 times more likely to have a special educational need, and there's an increased risk for future contact with the criminal justice service. And this is referred to as the school to prison pipeline, which is a term used globally, not just in Wales and the UK. The image on this slide is a depiction of the school to prison pipeline, and it comes into practice when a child or young person is permanently excluded from mainstream education and then is placed in a pupil referral unit. And this is where there's an increased risk for future contact with the criminal justice system and for them eventually ending up in prison. So, what type of school is a pupil referral unit? Well, pupil referral units, also known as PRUs, provide placements for pupils permanently excluded from a mainstream school due to social, emotional or behavioural difficulties, also known as SEBD. PRUs are the final placements that a local education authority will provide, and they play an integral part in providing education to children and young people who have been excluded and are at high risk of not engaging in education. My project is looking at PRUs within Wales, and I have identified 51. However, some PRUs are being categorised as special schools. Therefore, from my project, I will be defining these schools as Local Education Authority Final Provision Schools, LEAfP Schools for short. Here are the Welsh exclusion figures for the 2017-18 academic year. There were 373 permanent exclusions, over 36,000 5-day or less exclusions, and over 1,700 6-day or more exclusions. So in total, for the 2017-18 Welsh academic year, there were 38,807 exclusions. So to put that into context, the Welsh Government reported that in the 2018-19 academic year, there were 468,393 students attending Welsh schools. So if there were 38,807 students excluded, that equates to approximately 12% of the student population being excluded. However, it is important to note that these exclusions figures may include students excluded multiple times, so a student may have been excluded more than once for 5 days or less. The reported reasons for exclusion included physical assault, verbal abuse or threatening behaviour, persistent disruptive behaviour, substance misuse and other reasons, with 40.8% of the exclusions being due to physical assault, 17.8% due to verbal abuse or threatening behaviour, and 10.9% due to persistent disruptive behaviour. So approximately 75% of those excluded in the 2017-18 Welsh academic year were due to student behaviour. So out of the 373 students permanently excluded, 152 were due to physical assault, 66 due to verbal abuse, threatening behaviour, and 41 persistent disruptive behaviour. So a total of 259 students were reportedly permanently excluded due to their behaviour. Given that physical assault, verbal abuse and threatening behaviour and persistent disruptive behaviour are among the top reasons reported for permanent exclusion, it makes sense why these children and young people may be labelled as having social, emotional and behavioural difficulties. Here is a visual representation of the Welsh 2017-18 exclusion data by reason. The categories included had a percentage greater than 2%. Across all 3 types of exclusion, you can see a pattern where physical assault and verbal abuse or threatening behaviour are the 2 most common reasons for exclusion in 2017-18. Interestingly, theft comes in a close third and fourth for the fixed-term exclusion reasons, but it's not detailed as a reason behind permanent exclusion. Focusing on the permanent exclusion stats in the red box, you will note that the percentage of students being excluded are much higher for physical assault than the students receiving fixed-term exclusions. None of the permanently excluded students were excluded for theft, unlike the fixed-term exclusions, and there were a greater number of students being permanently excluded for substance misuse. You'll also note that the stats show that permanent disruptive behaviour was only given as a reason for those being permanently excluded in 2017-18. Again, given that physical assault, verbal abuse and threatening behaviour and persistent disruptive behaviour are among the top reasons reported for permanent exclusion, it makes sense why these children and young people may be labelled as having social, emotional and behavioural difficulties. There are 3 stages of my study, but for this presentation I'm only going to discuss the first stage, where the objective is to estimate the prevalence of neurodevelopmental disorders in LEAfP schools across Wales and to compare these with published prevalence rates, in the hope that I can establish if there is a high prevalence rate of neurodevelopmental disorders in this population. To estimate the prevalence rates, I will be sending a questionnaire out to all 51 schools to complete, which will ask them questions regarding how many of their students have a diagnosed neurodevelopmental disorder or a suspected neurodevelopmental disorder. The neurodevelopmental disorders to be included in this project had to be listed under one of the 6 Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Disorders, or DSM-5, neurodevelopmental disorder categories, and one of the 15 special educational needs categories. Using this inclusion criteria, I identified 7 neurodevelopmental disorders to include in my project. These include autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, developmental coordination disorder, also known as dyspraxia, developmental language disorder, dyslexia, dyscalculia, and Tourette syndrome. This table details the current prevalence rates according to the DSM-5 for the 7 neurodevelopmental disorders I am including in my project. To put the prevalence rates into context, according to the UN, there were an estimated 7.7 billion people worldwide in 2019. So according to the DSM-5 prevalence rates, there are approximately 77 million people globally with autism spectrum disorder, 100 million children with ADHD, 100 to 120 million with DCD, 539 million people globally with a developmental language disorder, and between 100 million and 1,155 million with dyslexia and dyscalculia. The DSM-5 doesn't provide a prevalence rate for Tourette syndrome. However, the US National Library of Medicine estimate that 1 to 10 in 1,000 children have Tourette syndrome. So that's approximately 200,000 to 20 million children. Tourette's Action highlight that up to 85% of Tourette syndrome population will also experience co-occurring features and conditions, such as ASD and ADHD, with disruptive or angry behaviours being reported in over 40% of the people with Tourette syndrome. This co-occurrence isn't just limited to Tourette syndrome, it occurs across all of the conditions. Once I have collected my stage 1 data, I will hopefully be able to establish if there is a higher prevalence rate of neurodevelopmental disorders in LEAfP schools. So what is the potential impact of this stage of my project on health and social care research, and how will it make a difference? Well, if there is a high prevalence of children with neurodevelopmental disorders attending LEAfP schools, this may highlight that there is a need for more external input from health and social care. There may also be a high prevalence of children attending these schools with suspected but undiagnosed neurodevelopmental disorders, which again may highlight that there is a need for a high level of input from health and social care, which in turn could have a significant impact on the health and well-being of this population of children. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my presentation. I hope that you found it interesting. The references I referred to in my presentation are at the end of the PowerPoint.